Good morning, everyone. Yes, my slide. I would like to talk to you a little bit about creative data visualization design. So, let's say you want to create a chart. Imagine that this piece of paper is your data set. One of the typical things that you do then is you start looking at the data set, and then you try to figure out what's inside my data set, what are the dimensions, and based on that you may decide, well, I'm going to make this or that type of chart. So this crumbled piece of paper is your chart. There's nothing wrong with it. If it's a line chart or bar chart, everybody uses this, everybody understands this, so perfectly fine. But that's not the only thing. So what if you want to create a visualization that is really beautiful? How does that change your design? Or what if you create a visualization where your data set is about some kind of emotion and you want to express that emotion in your design? How does that change your design? Or maybe your data set is about rain. How do you create a design that really expresses the fact that your data is about rain? Or what if your visualization, if you want your users to play around with your visualization, how will that change your design? So when I look at the reasons why clients come to me, then they have all these kinds of things, including showing off to my colleagues. I once had a project where they literally wanted to have a black background so that they could show the cool black background to their colleagues. So these are all the kinds of things that people want. It's not just about communicating insights, but it can be more than something like that. Now, I'm currently developing my own course on creative data visualization design, and while doing this, to come up with some kind of overarching framework, so that when you do this course, you have a sense of what your where this belongs in the bigger picture. Now, this may look like a relatively easy diagram to understand, but it took quite a bit of iteration, because what I try to do is to make my own thinking, which is kind of intuitive and automatic by now, explicit. And once you start doing that, you run into all kinds of strange questions like, what is data? What is information? When does data become information? For who is it information? Those kind of things. And trying to answer those is quite a bit of a journey. So, for instance, let's take data. So what is data? Let's say you want to measure something in the physical world, for instance, how tall I am. I'm 1 meter 89 centimeters, and what is that? That is not something that you can grab, you can touch it or feel it. So the interesting thing is that data, in order to work with it, basically comes into existence once we start storing it. But the data itself, it's kind of a strange thing. And as you may know, we as humans, we're not very good at understanding large set of numbers, so what we typically do, we turn that into some kind of visual representation, because we are very good at understanding visual stuff. But that too is also kind of strange, because it is still not, it's actually still not information. It is what we're actually playing around with, and what we're tweaking is small visual elements, and what the color is, where they're positioned, and all those kind of things. But it's still not information, at least that's how I see it. It only becomes information once a user starts looking at it and making an interpretation. So it all happens in the mind of a user. So the ultimate question is, how do you design, basically as a visualization designer, how do you tweak those visual elements so that the thing that you have measured in the world, which kind of does not exist, how do you tweak those visual elements so that in the mind of a user, some kind of information starts to emerge? And to me, that's kind of a magical process. And that it happens in your mind, that's also something I want to prove a little bit to you. So you can probably recognize that this is Braille. If you can read this, please don't spoil it, but who of you can read this? Either you're very shy or nobody can read this. Well, if I show you this, then you can read this, right? It says the word prank. And the dots themselves have not changed. The only thing that has changed is I have given you some additional information so that in your mind you can make the translation. Oh, the P maps to these two first dots, and etc. So now I just changed the information in your mind. And as a matter of fact, I tricked you because it's not prank. It's blind, and that is true if you look it up. So again, I changed it in your mind. So to me, this is really fascinating, and I'm currently diving real deep into how things get meaning and those kind of things. I'm not an expert on it, but I find it truly fascinating because it's very relevant when you try to visualize data and you want to convey a message, and how do you do that in a good way. Now, the second part of my framework is basically how you do it, and that again looks relatively simple, but if I look at my own process, this is what I'm constantly doing. You first create something, and then you are looking at it and you have to decide, does it work with the goals that you have in mind? Or is it beautiful enough? Does it convey the information? Does it, those kind of things. And so based on that judgment, you have to you come to some conclusion. I need to do an improvement. But then you have to come up with an idea how to do this. What is a solution to do this? And some of the ideas are very straightforward. Maybe you need to make something a little bit bigger, then it's better. But some other situations could mean that you may have to come up with completely different solutions. So imagine a pie chart with way too many pies that people cannot read. Maybe you have to come up with a completely different solution that still communicates the same information but in a different way. Now, and all this is based on skills and knowledge. So if you're limited to only coming up with pie charts, line charts, and bar charts, then that's the only thing that you will be able to do. So the idea is to expand this collection of skills and knowledge. And for the second part of my talk, I would like to show you some of my own projects in which I, do some of those things. And the first one is about, a very well-known virus, coronavirus. And it's a personal project because I also like very much what I do for a living. So I also start a personal project just for the fun of it. And so this is a project I started when there was no vaccine yet. So all you would see in the news was daily new confirmed COVID cases. And you would see diagrams like this where, and again, a line chart perfectly fine, it communicates the information, everybody understands it. At the same time, to me, these numbers don't really, rationally you can understand these numbers, but it's hard to get a feeling for those numbers. So how much bigger is 3,000 to 2,500? That's, to get a feeling for those differences, that's really hard to do. And this is basically what I came up with. It's kind of an overview of all the countries. And what you see is, what I did was the daily number of COVID cases, I translated that to a frequency. So an average frequency throughout the day. So each progress bar it makes a full round whenever there's one other person reported. And so the idea behind this is that it's very difficult to imagine a large group of people because that just remains a group, but it's easier to imagine one person. And so then you see that some of the countries, there's another one, and actually you can also turn on sound, so you hear a ping sound every time someone in the world is being reported to have corona. And it was picked up by quite a few people, and when people start saying that this was scary or terrifying, even though I didn't really mean to scare them, but to me, if people respond in such a way, it is kind of feedback that this idea of giving it more, these numbers more of a feeling of what it means, it kind of succeeded. And another thing is that what I did was I created kind of a real-time simulation. So, although it's not really true because I took the average throughout the day, but this is a project not by me, but this is also kind of a real-time simulation. Here this is a YouTube video called Riding Light, and the person who created this, he's showing you what it looks like in real time if a light particle leaves the sun. And so you're traveling with the speed of light, and it takes 8 minutes, and that's also how long the video takes to reach Earth, and 45 minutes to reach Jupiter. And so you have to watch 45 minutes to actually see Jupiter. And this also gives you a better sense of the size of our own solar system. So the advice I would try to give you here is that think about the human scale. So big numbers and things like that are very hard for people to understand. And so, of course, you can visualize big numbers right away. If you have a data set with big numbers, you can turn it into some chart. But you could also challenge yourself and give it a bit more thinking, and how can you turn those numbers into something that is more relatable to humans? And the other thing is, and it's, in many cases it's not possible, but sometimes a direct experience where you can really experience what it is like to do something or see something can also be an option. I also saw a website once where you have to scroll an actual meter or something like that just to get a sense of the distance. So in that case you're also directly experiencing what a meter is. Another, basically two projects I would like to show you is about travel data, and more specifically it's actually about train travel data. And so this was also a personal project, and this is 24 hours of train data. And the idea I had here was, well, maybe it's a kind of strange idea, but conceptually I thought if a train leaves from one city to another city, then these cities conceptually become closer to each other, because you step in a train and then you just sit there and you step out, and then, well, sometimes it feels like they've collided, these cities, or something. Strange idea, but that is how I visualize this. So whenever a train leaves a city, this city is moving towards the destination city. But since trains are leaving all the time and in all directions, these cities are moving all over the place. And so this is the Netherlands, and in the west of the Netherlands there are many more train stations and many more trains. So what you see typically throughout the day is that the west really contracts because all those cities move closer to each other, and during the night it kind of expands again, and so it relaxes. And this was just a visual experiment. No other goal than just playing around with data and trying to come up with some original idea. But it was seen by the Dutch railways, and they liked it, and they asked me to basically create the same project, but then for them. And personally, I don't like doing the same thing twice, so I challenged myself to come up with something new. And so this is what I came up with. This, again, is 24 hours of train data. By the way, the context for this project was, because you may be wondering why would the Dutch railways ask me to create something like this. The reason they asked me was that, like many companies, they publish an annual report every year, and their argumentation was nobody reads annual reports, so we need to have something cool at least on that page, so that people at least visit this page, and then hopefully they read the annual report. So it was kind of to draw them into this page. Now what you see right here is again trains moving from one city to another city, but not all the trains all at once. So I've selected one city, the yellow ones is the selected city, and then the trains that you see on the map are the trains that are passing that city at some point during the day. But what I also do is every time a train moves, it leaves a trail. But after 24 hours, the entire cycle repeats itself. I turn this trail into a circle, because after 24 hours the circle starts again. So the trail is not just in a flat surface, but it also moves back, and that's what's happening. And yeah, you can also toggle between the map view and the 3D view. And the 3D view, yeah, you can see that kind of as a signature of the traces of the trains for that particular city. Now, the thing I want to give you as a suggestion here is to question your assumption, because the first map, you saw that the cities were moving, and when you think of a map, you think, well, cities and roads and everything, buildings, everything is fixed in a certain place. And in the physical world, that is true. But here you're working with the digital world. And so you have the opportunity to change that. And yeah, of course, it depends on how crazy you want to go, but you can question your assumptions, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the case that things that are fixed in the physical world should be fixed in the digital world. And the other thing is the second visualization that uses 3D. And 3D in visualization is often considered to be something that you have to be very careful about, because if something is in perspective, then the sizes of shapes are being distorted, you can have overlapping shapes, and so it becomes harder to communicate information. So perspective is many times something to be, well, people say, well, don't do it unless you have a very good reason. But my opinion is that for creative visualization, sometimes you have different goals. And getting the information out of it may not be the primary goal. So for the second train visualization, the idea was just to show something cool. And it still communicates some information, and you may not get very exact information, but that was not the primary goal. And so that was for me a reason why I said, in this case, 3D is kind of maybe even a good choice, because it helps with this idea of creating something cool. A final project I would like to show you is about star data, and it's a project I did for the European Space Agency. And specifically it is about this satellite. This satellite is called Hipparcos, and it has been in space, and it took measurements of about 100,000 stars. And at the time it was the largest and most extensive collection of stars that has been around. After this mission, the European Space Agency had another mission called Gaia, in which they measured 1.5 billion stars. But at the time they reached out to me, that data was not released yet, because it takes really a lot of time to process the data in order to release it for researchers to work with it. And so as a kind of a stepping stone to people who are interested in this type of data, they asked me to create a visualization to show what can you find inside a star catalog, because that's what I call it, and it's really physically a book where you can find maps like this, star maps, but you can also find tables with all the measurements, and of course it's also available in digital form. And so this is the project that I created. It's not moving yet. Okay, now it's moving. So this is the page where you will land, and once you start clicking on that start button, you end up with something like this. So here on the right, you have a short description of what you're looking at. There on top, you have short instructions of how to interact with this visualization. Here at the bottom, you see these, the different stages of this visualization, of the different views. And in the lower left corner, you have some buttons that can toggle the names of well-known stars and constellations, so that you can, which are things to help you orient yourself in space. And I always find this fascinating when you zoom out with the constellations, then you realize that the choice of constellations has really been a human choice from the position of Earth, because it has nothing to do with the actual brightness and distances of stars. The other thing is that each of those views has one single topic, and this one is about the apparent magnitude, which is the brightness of stars as if you would measure them or see them from a certain point in space. And that's what you can play around with in this view. The second view is about the absolute magnitude, which is the brightness of stars as if they would be at the same distance from the observer. And that's basically what I've done. So here, if I'm zooming out, and you see that the stars are literally at the same distance from the observer. So this is more a conceptual view. Then the next view is the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram, and this is a well-known diagram for astronomers because it says something about the life cycle of stars. So at the bottom you see the temperature, and on the y-axis you see the brightness. And throughout the life cycle of a star, the position of a star changes in this diagram. So based on that, you can say this is an old star, this is a young star, or this is a dead star, or something like that. And in this view, the color is introduced as a way to communicate the temperature. Okay, I'm missing one slide, I don't know why, but before this there was the motion view. You can see it in this one as well. Because you might think that stars are stationary in the sky, but they're actually moving at very high speeds, but it's so far away that we cannot see this. And in this view, you can also see this. Here I have a simulation of stars moving in 3D. And if you then go to this final view, the Explore view, you have all the controls available. So you can change the brightness of the stars, you can turn on the color, you can start the animation, the motion of the stars, and you can toggle between a 3D view and a stereographic projection, which is what I did, basically a flat view where you see all the stars at once. The way that I've set this visualization up is sometimes called the martini glass structure, because if you have a complex topic, it's usually not such a good idea to just throw it to the user and for him to figure this out. So how this visualization is structured is by first focusing on a single topic, having limited interactivity, and the idea behind it is that a user can understand this single topic and then moves on to the next one. So that's the narrow part of the martini glass. And at the end, you can assume that, well, the user has gone through all these steps, so now he knows or she knows what this is all about. And then so the martini glass widens up again, and then you give all the controls, and then it should be the case that the user should know what he's looking at and what he's playing around with. The two things I would like to share with you here is about interactivity. So if you incorporate interactivity, you allow users to explore a data set yourself, and it can become more engaging because users can figure out things themselves, they can test out things, they can maybe they have questions themselves and they can explore them or answer them using the visualization themselves. So adding interactivity can many times be a very good thing. It can also be a reason if you have too much data to filter out things and to create separate views and things like that. So generally, interactivity is something worthwhile to consider. And the second thing, I already explained it quite a bit, is the martini glass structure. If you are using complex information, first break it down in smaller steps, and after that you can let the user free to play around with it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for such an amazing presentation, all of your work. If anybody has any questions or comments, we can take a couple of them. Yeah.
Thank you so much. When you want to create 3D visualizations, interactive, in motion, for example, where do you get inspiration from for the form, for the trajectory, for the movements, from the elements?
I'm sorry, the inspiration for the motion?
Inspiration for how you organize, how you present visualization in 3 dimensions. Like when you have, for example, when you have a wheel,
yeah,
and so on.
Yeah, well, the one case where it makes sense to create 3D visualizations if your data represents something, a physical object, so you can kind of show that, I don't know, the airflow around an airplane, you can show that as a 3D visualization. That is a situation where it makes sense. This wheel is kind of a conceptual thing, and I'm not sure if there was I don't think there was really a kind of inspiration that led me to do this. It's more like, and that is also quite typical for my process, that what I try to do is to think about what is this data about, what are the boundaries of my data, because in this case it was 24 hours, and that kind of suggests you can loop this, and so it is really, yeah, thinking more deeply about what your data is about, what you try to communicate, what the context is, who your users are, what the goal of the project is, taking all those kind of things and keeping that in mind while trying things out, because that was not the first attempt and it worked immediately. It was trying out all kinds of things. But that's usually how it works for me, at least.
You show us the visualization of star stripes, yes? And can you please show us a black hole visualization?
Can I show what?
Black hole.
I don't have that one yet. Would be nice.
Thanks a lot for the very, very exciting presentation.
Yeah.
I want to ask, how would you advise to visualize small data? What I mean is that, for example, in the previous presentation, we referred to importance of showing information about those groups of people who are maybe most vulnerable or neglected or not represented in these big data narratives. So how would you advise to tell the story when we are referring to a small numbers of data in a visually nice manner?
I have to think about that a little bit, because are you talking about a big data set where a small group represents a minority, for instance, or is the full data set about a minority? Because I don't know if I have a general advice other than basically like the previous answer, that you have to think about what you try to communicate and what you try to emphasize, and and also how you do that, and maybe some cultural or personal ideas people have about how you show data. So for instance, a well-known one is the colors for gender, and that is something that people now try to find alternatives for, because pink and blue, well, maybe that's kind of conflicts with who you think you are or something like that. So there are those kind of smaller things. Other than that, I would probably treat it just like any other visualization, but in this case, the topic is we have to emphasize a minority or a specific group, and so, but that could be, it can be a minority of people, or it can be, I don't know, in a train visualization, a minority of trains. So the overarching concept is we have to focus on a smaller group in a bigger group, and I think for me it's hard to give general advice on that, but okay.